Before we dive into this mind-bending story, I need you to do me a massive favor. Hit that like button right now, seriously, right now, because what you're about to witness will completely shatter everything you thought you knew about humanity's place in the universe. And drop a comment below telling me which moment gave you chills. Trust me, you'll know when it happens. The crystalline spires of Zethkari gleamed like frozen lightning against the violet sky, their surfaces pulsing with energy patterns that would have driven human mathematicians to madness just trying to comprehend the equations involved. This was the crown jewel of the Valdoran Empire, a civilization so advanced they had transcended the need for individual bodies, existing as pure consciousness within networks of quantum crystalline matrices. High Arbiter Vextai materialized as a shimmering humanoid outline of pure energy, his form flickering between dimensions as he addressed the emergency council. The crisis they faced was unprecedented, even by their standards. The Devourers have broken through the seventh-dimensional barrier. His voice resonated through frequencies that existed beyond sound. 12 star systems have already been consumed. At their current rate of expansion, they will reach the core worlds within 47 standard cycles. A ripple of fear passed through the assembled consciousness of the galaxy's most powerful species. The Devourers were an ancient evil that existed outside conventional reality, beings of pure entropy that consumed not just matter and energy, but the very concepts that held reality together. Where they passed, mathematics failed, physics collapsed, and existence itself simply stopped. Arbiter Keelneth, her energy signature burning with desperate urgency, manifested beside Vextai. The quantum barriers we constructed have proven useless. They're not just breaking our defenses, they're unmaking them, erasing the very possibility that they ever existed. The chamber fell silent except for the harmonics of pure thought. The Valdorans had ruled the galaxy for 3 million years, their technology so advanced it was indistinguishable from magic to lesser species. They had conquered black holes, rewritten the laws of thermodynamics, and created pocket universes as casually as others might write poetry. And they were helpless. Show them the Proxima incident, commanded Arbiter Zaleth, his consciousness burning with barely contained rage. The holographic display materialized in the center of the chamber, showing what had once been a thriving binary star system. Now there was simply nothing. Not empty space, but the complete absence of the concept of space itself. It was as if the entire system had been edited out of reality's source code. The crystalline collective attempted to stop them there. Keelneth explained, her energy form dimming with grief. They deployed their most advanced reality manipulation technology, weaponized mathematics that could rewrite the fundamental constants of physics. The Devourers consumed it all. Not just the weapons, but the mathematical principles that made them possible. Vextai's form flickered with something that might have been despair. They consumed pi. For 17 standard minutes, circles were impossible in that sector of space because the ratio between circumference and diameter simply didn't exist anymore. The implications hung in the air like a death sentence. If beings existed that could unmake mathematical constants, the very foundations upon which reality was built, what hope did anyone have? Have we contacted the Zephyrians? Vextai asked, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer. Their entire star cluster was unmade 6 cycles ago, Keelneth responded. The crystalline collective has retreated beyond the galactic rim. The hive minds of Sector 7 have gone completely silent. Even the Eternal Watchers have begun evacuating to parallel universes. The Eternal Watchers, being so advanced they existed across multiple realities simultaneously, were fleeing. The full scope of the threat was beginning to sink in. Another consciousness materialized, Arbiter Dexmari, his form crackling with what humans might have recognized as barely contained panic. There is one option we haven't considered. The assembled arbiters turned their attention to him, their combined focus creating small distortions in local space-time. Dexmari's form flickered with what could only be described as embarrassment. The primitives. In the Sol system. A sound that might have been laughter, if beings of pure energy could laugh, rippled through the chamber. It was not a pleasant sound. The carbon-based mammals? Vexed Eye's energy signature shifted to something resembling disbelief. The ones who still use chemical propulsion and electromagnetic radiation for communication? You jest. The flesh creatures who still fight wars by throwing metal projectiles at each other? Zaleth added, his consciousness practically radiating contempt. They can't even achieve unified planetary governance, much less comprehend multidimensional physics. I understand how it sounds, Dexmari insisted, his form stabilizing with renewed conviction. But consider this, they are the only species we've encountered that shows absolutely no comprehension of higher dimensional mathematics. They operate entirely within the first three spatial dimensions and linear time. Precisely why they're useless, Keelneth interjected. They can't even perceive the reality where this threat exists. Their most advanced theoretical physicists are still arguing about whether multiple dimensions even exist. Or, Dexmari's voice carried a note of desperate inspiration. They exist so completely outside higher dimensional reality that they might be invisible to the Devourers. They might be able to act where we cannot. The silence that followed was profound. The idea was so radical, so fundamentally absurd, that it took several moments for its implications to sink in. Vexed Eye finally spoke, his energy signature dim with resignation. You're suggesting we entrust the fate of galactic civilization to beings who still fight wars by throwing metal projectiles at each other. I'm suggesting we're out of options. Zaletha's form crackled with indignation. This is madness. These humans, they don't even understand that consciousness can exist without biological substrate. They think intelligence requires organic neural networks. Which is exactly why they might succeed where we have failed. Dexmari pressed. The Devourers target consciousness that operates in higher dimensions. They feed on advanced understanding of reality's underlying structure. But humans are too ignorant to be detected. Keelneth finished, her tone suggesting she was beginning to see the twisted logic. It's not just ignorance, Dexmari continued, his energy form brightening with growing excitement. I've been studying their scientific development. They have a unique approach to problem solving. When they encounter something that should be impossible according to their understanding of physics, they don't accept that it's impossible. They find ways to make it work anyway. He manifested a holographic display showing human technological development over the past century. Look at their progression. Heavier than air flight was theoretically impossible according to their early mathematical models. They built flying machines anyway. Quantum mechanics violated their intuitive understanding of reality. They built computers that exploit quantum properties anyway. They consistently achieve things their own science says shouldn't work. Vexed Eye studied the data, his consciousness parsing information at speeds that would have liquefied organic brains. They achieved technological breakthroughs through trial and error? Empirical testing without theoretical framework? They call it engineering, Dexmari said. The concept of making things work before understanding why they work. The assembled arbiters fell silent, trying to wrap their multidimensional consciousnesses around such a primitive concept. There's something else, Dexmari added quietly. Their approach to mathematics. They don't see numbers as fundamental aspects of reality, they see them as tools. When their equations don't match observed phenomena, they change the equations. They've even invented imaginary numbers to solve problems. Imaginary numbers? Keelnetha's energy signature flickered with confusion. How can numbers be imaginary? That's exactly my point. They invented mathematical concepts that shouldn't exist according to logical principles, and used them to build technology that works perfectly in the real world. They treat mathematics as something that can be negotiated with, rather than absolute law. The implications were staggering. A species that approached the fundamental laws of reality as suggestions rather than immutable facts might indeed be capable of operating outside the framework that made advanced civilizations vulnerable to the Devourers. Vexed Eye's form stabilized into a more solid configuration, the equivalent of a deep breath. Very well. Contact them. But Dexmari, if this fails, if we're reduced to asking primitives for help and they cannot deliver, then we die with the rest of the galaxy, Dexmari replied. But at least we'll have tried everything. Captain Sarah Chin stood on the bridge of the UES Indomitable, humanity's latest and most advanced deep space exploration vessel. At 347 meters long, it was impressive by human standards, a gleaming testament to engineering prowess, bristling with fusion reactors, magnetic rail weapons, and the most sophisticated AI systems Earth could produce. To the rest of the galaxy, it might as well have been a wooden sailing ship. Sarah was a third-generation space officer, following in the footsteps of her grandmother who had commanded the first human missions to Mars, and her mother who had led the colonization of Europa. At 38, she had the kind of calm confidence that came from years of making life-or-death decisions in the unforgiving environment of space. "Captain," Lieutenant Rodriguez called from the sensor station, his voice tight with excitement. "We're picking up some kind of massive energy signature dead ahead." "It's weird, ma'am. The readings don't make sense." Sarah frowned, studying the holographic display floating above the tactical table. The energy pattern was unlike anything in their databases, a swirling vortex of what their instruments could only describe as undefined phenomena. Distance? 2 light hours and closing. Whatever it is, it's big. Really big. And it's heading directly for the Alpha Centauri system. Lieutenant Commander Hayes, her executive officer, leaned over the tactical display. "Could it be some kind of natural phenomenon? A stellar collapse we haven't observed before?" "Negative," Rodriguez replied, his fingers dancing over his console. "This is definitely artificial. The energy patterns are too complex, too organized. It's almost like it's thinking." Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. First contact protocols had been theoretical for so long that actually implementing them seemed surreal. "All stop. Begin recording everything. If this is what I think it is." Before she could finish her sentence, the bridge lighting suddenly shifted to an eerie blue-white glow. The air itself seemed to shimmer, and then, impossibly, a figure materialized in the center of the bridge. It was humanoid but composed entirely of shifting, crystalline light. When it spoke, the words seemed to form directly in their minds rather than their ears. "Humans," the being said, its voice carrying harmonics that made their teeth ache. "I am High Arbiter Vextai of the Valdoran Empire. Your species is about to face extinction, along with every other form of life in this galaxy." The bridge crews sat in stunned silence. Sarah's mind raced through first contact protocols, but nothing in her training had prepared her for an entity that could materialize aboard their ship and speak directly into their consciousness. Dr. Elena Vasquez, the mission's chief science officer, broke the silence. "This is impossible. You can't be here. Our shields, our security systems, operate on principles we transcended 3 million years ago," Vextai replied, though his tone carried more desperation than condescension. "We exist primarily as pure consciousness. Your physical barriers are irrelevant to us." Sarah recovered first, her military training overriding her shock. "I'm Captain Sarah Chin, representing the United Earth Federation. If you're here to warn us about a threat, we need details. What kind of extinction are we facing?" Vextai's form flickered, and Sarah got the distinct impression he was struggling with some internal conflict. "Something beyond your comprehension. Beings we call the Devourers. They exist in dimensions your science hasn't discovered and consume reality itself. They have destroyed civilizations that your species could not even begin to understand. And you're telling us this because—" The pause that followed stretched long enough to make everyone uncomfortable. When Vextai finally responded, his energy signature had shifted to something that might have been embarrassment. "Because we need your help." Lieutenant Commander Hayes nearly choked on his coffee. "Our help? We can barely travel faster than light. Hell, we only achieved fusion power 50 years ago. That," Vextai said quietly, "may be exactly why you're our only hope." The explanation that followed defied every law of physics Sarah thought she understood. Vextai manifested holographic displays that showed cosmic destruction on a scale that made her mind reel. Entire star systems simply gone. Not destroyed, but retroactively never having existed at all. "The Devourers exist partially outside normal space-time," Vextai explained, his form flickering as he struggled to translate concepts into language humans could process. They feed on the quantum foam that underlies reality. Advanced civilizations, with their manipulation of higher dimensions and quantum realities, are like beacons to them, impossible to hide from, easy to target. Dr. Vasquez, her scientific training warring with what she was seeing, raised a trembling hand. You're saying they consume, what? The mathematical foundation of existence? In your primitive terms, yes. They eat the code that reality runs on. Sarah felt her mind struggling to process the implications. And advanced civilizations are vulnerable because they understand and manipulate this code? Precisely. The more sophisticated a species' understanding of reality's underlying structure, the more visible they become to the devourers. We have transcended physical existence, learned to manipulate the fundamental forces that govern space-time itself. To them, we might as well be firing signal flares. Hayes looked skeptical. So what makes us different? Why would we be invisible to these things? Vextai's energy form brightened slightly, the equivalent of a bitter laugh. Because you are so primitive, so completely locked into basic three-dimensional thinking, that you barely register on any higher-dimensional sensors. You exist in what we consider to be the shallow end of reality. The bridge fell silent as the implications sank in. Sarah was the first to speak. You want us to fight beings that can unmake reality itself, she said slowly. Because we're too stupid to understand how reality actually works. In the crudest possible terms, yes. Dr. Vasquez stood up abruptly, her face pale. This is insane. We can't fight something like this. We don't even have the weapons, the technology. You have something far more valuable. Vextai interrupted. You have ignorance. Blessed, protective ignorance of the very forces that make our civilizations vulnerable. Sarah studied the alien being, noting the desperation in his energy patterns. Assuming we agree to help, and I'm not saying we will, what exactly are you asking us to do? We need you to build a trap. Something that will contain the devourers permanently. How exactly are we supposed to trap beings that exist outside normal physics? Vextai's response sent chills through everyone present. By not trying to understand the physics involved. The next 18 hours were a blur of frantic preparation. The Valdorans, working through their quantum communication networks, briefed human commanders across the globe. The story was so unbelievable that it took direct demonstrations of Valdoran technology to convince Earth's leaders this wasn't an elaborate hoax. President Martinez stood in the emergency session of the United Nations Security Council, her face pale as she addressed the assembled delegates. Ladies and gentlemen, I know how this sounds. Believe me, I know. But we have verified independently that these beings are genuine. The technology they've demonstrated, it's beyond anything we thought possible. The Russian delegate, Premier Volkov, leaned forward. You're asking us to commit the entire planet's resources to a plan that violates everything we know about physics, based on the word of beings we've known existed for less than a day? I'm asking us to consider the alternative, Martinez replied grimly. If they're telling the truth, and all our evidence suggests they are, then we're facing the end of everything. Not just human civilization, but existence itself. General Morrison, chairman of the Joint Chiefs, activated a holographic display. We've run scenario analyses. If these devourers are real, conventional military response is meaningless. Nuclear weapons, antimatter charges, even theoretical planet crackers would be like throwing pebbles at a hurricane. Our only advantage is that we apparently don't understand enough about reality to be properly targeted. Meanwhile, in Geneva, Dr. Marcus Webb stood in the hastily assembled command center, staring at equations that hurt his brain just to look at. At 61, he was humanity's leading theoretical physicist, a man who had spent his entire career pushing the boundaries of human understanding. Now he was being asked to work with mathematics that violated every principle he held sacred. This is impossible, he muttered for the 20th time, studying the Valdoran data streams. These mathematical structures can't exist. They violate causality, conservation of energy, and basic logic. And yet, Vextai observed, his energy form hovering nearby. They do exist. This is why your species may succeed where we have failed. You will not waste time trying to understand what cannot be understood through conventional physics. Dr. Webb rubbed his temples, feeling a headache building behind his eyes. You're asking me to build technology based on mathematics that I cannot and will not ever comprehend. It's like asking a caveman to repair a quantum computer. More accurate than you realize. Another voice interjected. Sarah turned to see a new energy form materializing, Arbiter Keelneth, her consciousness burning with urgent intensity. I've been studying your species' technological development, Keelneth continued. Your greatest breakthroughs consistently occur when you ignore theoretical limitations and focus on empirical results. Your Wright brothers achieved flight despite their equations proving it impossible. Your inventors created computers without understanding quantum mechanics. You have a remarkable talent for making things work before figuring out why they work. Sarah had been assigned as humanity's primary military liaison. She studied the tactical displays showing the Devourer's advance, great tiers in spacetime that moved with terrifying purpose, leaving behind voids where star systems had once existed. How do we fight something like this? She asked. You don't fight them, Keelneth replied. You redirect them. The Devourers follow quantum signatures. They're drawn to complex interactions between matter and energy in higher dimensions. But they have trouble perceiving anything that operates purely in baseline reality. Dr. Webb looked up from his impossible equations. You want us to build some kind of quantum lighthouse? Draw them away from populated systems? More than that, Vextai said. We need you to create a trap. Something that will contain them permanently. How exactly are we supposed to trap beings that exist outside normal physics? By building a device that aggressively enforces normal physics, Keelneth explained. A reality anchor, something that creates a zone of absolutely mundane, three-dimensional space-time so stable and inflexible that it forces anything within its influence to conform to baseline physical laws. Dr. Webb stared at the readouts, his mind reeling. The power requirements alone would be astronomical. We're talking about creating a localized region where the fundamental constants of physics are artificially stabilized at specific values. The energy needed to maintain that against natural quantum fluctuations would exceed the output of your sun, Vextai agreed. Under normal circumstances. What do you mean, normal circumstances? The two Valdoran entities exchanged what might have been meaningful looks, their energy forms flickering in complex patterns. There are ways, Keelneth said carefully, to circumvent energy conservation laws. Methods that advanced civilizations cannot use because our understanding of physics prevents us from attempting them. You want us to break the laws of physics, Sarah said flatly. We want you to ignore them, Vextai corrected. There's a difference. Hey there, incredible humans. I know this is getting intense, and we're just scratching the surface. If you're as mind-blown as I am right now, smash that like button and let me know in the comments what you think humanity's secret weapon really is. Trust me, it's about to get even more incredible. The plan that emerged over the following days was so insane it transcended normal categories of risk assessment. Human engineers, working with Valdoran technology they couldn't begin to comprehend, would construct what could only be described as a reality anchor, a device that would create a zone of absolutely normal, three-dimensional spacetime so aggressively mundane that the Devourers would become trapped within it. The problem was scale. To trap entities that could consume star systems, they would need to build something the size of a small moon. Impossible, declared Admiral Morrison, head of Earth's Space Forces, as he reviewed the preliminary designs. We don't have the resources, the time, or the technology. You're talking about a construction project that would make the International Space Station look like a child's toy. We do now, Vextai replied. What followed was the most rapid technological advancement in human history. Valdoran matter compilers materialized in Earth's orbital shipyards, devices that existed in 17 dimensions simultaneously and could assemble atomic structures with perfect precision. Quantum fabricators that operated on principles human science insisted were impossible began producing materials that shouldn't have been able to exist. The human workers operating them had no idea how any of it functioned. They simply pushed buttons, pulled levers, and watched in amazement as impossible structures took shape before their eyes. Chief Engineer Patricia Santos stood in the primary assembly bay of Luna's Shipyard Alpha, watching in fascination as a Valdoran matter compiler constructed what appeared to be a solid cube of crystallized space-time. According to the readouts, the object was simultaneously present in multiple dimensions, yet somehow remained stable in normal three-dimensional space. It's like teaching a child to pilot a starship by telling them it's a really complicated car, Kilneth observed to Vextai as they watched human technicians assemble quantum field generators. They don't understand what they're doing, so they can do it without the mental blocks that would stop us. The psychological aspect is fascinating, Vextai agreed. Their ignorance of higher dimensional physics actually allows them to manipulate those forces more freely than we can. We know too much about why these things should be impossible. Chief Santos called out to her crew. All right, people, we need to install the quantum field modulator in Section C. According to these instructions, it needs to be connected to the hyperdimensional power conduit using these crystalline conductors. One of her technicians, a young engineer named David Kim, raised his hand. Chief, I've been reading the technical specifications, and I don't understand how any of this is supposed to work. These power levels violate conservation of energy, and the field geometries are mathematically impossible. Santos grinned. Kim, the moment you start understanding this stuff, it'll probably stop working. So let's just focus on following the instructions and hope for the best. It was perhaps the most scientifically irresponsible approach ever taken to a galaxy-saving project. It was also, according to the Valdorans, their only hope of success. Dr. Webb, meanwhile, had been assigned to work directly with the most advanced Valdoran theoretical constructs. His task was to calibrate the reality anchor's fundamental parameters, essentially programming the laws of physics that would exist within its area of effect. "This is giving me a migraine," he muttered, staring at equations that seemed to shift and change when he wasn't looking directly at them. "I'm literally being asked to write the source code for local reality." Arbiter Dexmari materialized beside him, his energy form pulsing with what might have been sympathy. "Dr. Webb, perhaps you're approaching this incorrectly. Don't try to understand the mathematics. Simply input the values that feel right." "Feel right? You want me to configure the fundamental constants of physics based on intuition? Your species has an unusual relationship with mathematical concepts," Dexmari explained. "You treat numbers as tools rather than absolute truths. This allows you to make adjustments that we, bound by rigorous logical frameworks, cannot." Webb laughed bitterly. "So you want me to guess at the correct values for the speed of light, Planck's constant, and the fine structure constant within a localized region of space-time?" "Essentially, yes. And if I guess wrong? Reality collapses within the anchor's area of effect, creating a localized zone of absolute nothingness that expands at the speed of light until it consumes the universe." Webb stared at the Valdoran entity. "No pressure, then?" "None whatsoever." Despite the impossible stakes, Webb found himself settling into the work with surprising ease. The Valdoran mathematics operated on principles that human logic couldn't process, but there was an intuitive component to it that his mind seemed to grasp on an almost instinctive level. "It's like music," he explained to Sarah during one of their briefing sessions. "I can't read the sheet music, but I can feel the rhythm. These equations want to resolve in certain ways, and if I just go with it, the numbers seem to fall into place." Sarah watched him work, noting the way his entire demeanor had changed. The rigid, analytical scientist had been replaced by something that looked almost like an artist. "Are you sure about this, Marcus? You're literally gambling with the laws of physics." "I'm not gambling," he replied, his fingers dancing over holographic displays with increasing confidence. "I'm negotiating. And apparently the universe is more willing to compromise than any of us ever realized." The construction of the reality anchor took place in the asteroid belt between Mars and Jupiter, using Ceres as a foundation. Valdoran technology allowed them to reshape the dwarf planet at the molecular level, transforming it into a massive spherical framework that bristled with impossible technologies. Captain Sarah Chin stood in the command center of Luna Base Alpha, watching the construction through real-time feeds. The device was taking shape with impossible speed. Structures that should have taken decades to build were completed in days. "ETA on the Devourers?" she asked Lieutenant Rodriguez, who had been transferred to the coordination team. 16 hours, came the reply. "They've consumed the Rigel system. They're accelerating." The news sent a chill through the command center. Rigel had been home to the Crystalline Collective's most advanced defensive installations, fortress worlds protected by reality manipulation technology that could theoretically withstand any conventional attack. The fact that the Devourers had consumed it in less than 6 hours was deeply troubling. "Captain," Dr. Webb approached, his hair disheveled from days of working with mathematics that violated his understanding of reality. "I need you to understand something. If this works, if we actually manage to trap these things, we'll be doing something that rewrites the fundamental laws of physics. The implications are terrifying?" Sarah suggested. "Beyond terrifying. We'll be proving that reality itself is negotiable. That the laws of physics are more like guidelines. And once that door is opened, one crisis at a time, Doctor." But Webb wasn't finished. "Sarah, I've been running simulations, and there's something else. The power requirements for maintaining the reality anchor aren't just astronomical, they're impossible. Even with Valdoran technology, we can't generate enough energy to maintain the field stability needed to contain entities of this magnitude." "What are you saying?" "I'm saying we need to cheat. Break conservation of energy so thoroughly that the universe doesn't have time to notice." Before Sarah could respond, alarms began blaring throughout the base. Admiral Morrison's voice echoed over the facility's communication system. "All stations, we have a problem. Long-range sensors are detecting massive spatial distortions approaching the outer system. The Devourers are here. ETA to Earth orbit, 14 hours. The command center erupted into controlled chaos as personnel scrambled to implement final preparations. Through the viewports, they could see the reality anchor in the distance, a massive sphere of crystallized impossibility that hurt to look at directly. "Dr. Webb," Sarah called over the din. "How long until the anchor is operational?" 6 hours minimum. Maybe 8. That's cutting it close. "Sarah," Webb's voice was quiet, almost lost in the noise around them. "There's something else. The anchor, it's not just going to trap the Devourers. It's going to fundamentally alter the nature of space-time in this entire system. Once we activate it, nothing will ever be quite the same." Before she could ask what he meant, Vextime materialized beside them, his energy form flickering with urgent intensity. "Captain Chun, we need to discuss strategy. The Devourers have detected the reality anchor. They're moving to intercept it before it can be activated. Can we defend it? Not with conventional weapons. But there may be another way. Your species' unpredictability extends to your military tactics. You might be able to devise strategies that we cannot anticipate, and if we cannot anticipate them, neither can the Devourers." Sarah felt the weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders. She was being asked to develop battle plans for fighting entities that existed outside normal reality, using weapons that shouldn't work, based on physics that didn't make sense. In other words, a typical Tuesday for humanity. "All right," she said, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had spent years making impossible decisions. "Let's figure out how to fight things that can't be fought." The Devourers arrived with no fanfare. Space simply began to wrong in their vicinity. Stars flickered and went out, not destroyed but retroactively never having existed. The very concept of light began to fail in their presence. Sarah stood on the bridge of the Indomitable, now serving as the flagship for humanity's hastily assembled defense fleet. Around them, every ship in Earth's arsenal had been deployed, a mixture of military vessels, converted civilian craft, and experimental prototypes that had never been tested in actual combat. Against entities that could unmake reality itself, it seemed pathetically inadequate. "Captain," Lieutenant Rodriguez called from the sensor station. We're getting readings on the lead devourer. It's. God, how do I even describe this? It's the size of Earth's moon, but it's not really there. Our instruments can detect it, but they can't figure out what they're detecting. Show me. The main screen flickered to life, displaying what could only charitably be called a visual representation of something that existed beyond visual comprehension. It was absence given form, negation made manifest. Looking at it was like staring into a hole in reality itself. Distance? Approximately 3 million kilometers and closing. Speed is variable. It seems to be moving by eliminating the space between itself and its destination rather than traveling through it. Dr. Webb, now serving as the fleet's science advisor, looked up from his instruments with an expression of profound unease. Captain, I'm reading massive fluctuations in local space-time. The Devourer's presence is causing reality to become unstable. The laws of physics are starting to break down in its vicinity. How long until it reaches the reality anchor? At its current rate of approach, 4 hours. But Captain, there's something else. It's not alone. The display shifted, revealing additional contacts emerging from what their instruments could only describe as conceptual space, regions where the normal definitions of existence became meaningless. How many? Sarah asked, though she wasn't sure she wanted to know the answer. 7 confirmed contacts. Possibly more. Our sensors are having trouble distinguishing between individual entities and manifestations of the same entity across multiple dimensions. Sarah felt her mind struggling to process the tactical implications. How do you fight an enemy that might be one entity, or 7, or both simultaneously? Status on the reality anchor? Dr. Webb consulted his displays. 2 hours to full activation. Maybe 3 if we encounter complications. We need to buy time, Sarah decided. All ships, this is Admiral Morrison. The Admiral's voice crackled over the fleet-wide communication system. We're going to implement the most insane battle plan in human history. Remember, we're not trying to destroy these things, we're trying to confuse them long enough for the anchor to come online. What followed could only be described as warfare through applied insanity. Human ships began executing maneuvers that violated every principle of naval strategy ever developed. They attacked in random patterns, retreated when they should advance, and advanced when retreat was the only logical option. The Indomitable led the charge, firing every weapon in its arsenal at targets that existed only partially in normal space. Railgun projectiles, plasma bolts, and missile salvos passed through the Devourers without effect, but that wasn't the point. The confusion is working, Vextai reported, his energy form manifesting on the bridge. The Devourers are accustomed to facing enemies that operate according to logical strategic principles. Your chaotic approach is disrupting their ability to predict your actions. How long can we keep this up? Unknown. But Captain, there's something you need to see. A new display materialized, showing energy readings from the lead Devourer. It's adapting. Learning from your tactics. Each time you repeat a maneuver, it becomes less effective. Sarah studied the patterns, her mind racing. Then we don't repeat anything. All ships implement protocol chaos. No predetermined patterns, no tactical doctrine. I want every captain to fight like they're making it up as they go along. Because we are making it up as we go along, muttered Commander Hayes. Exactly. The battle that followed defied every convention of space warfare. Human ships deployed tactics that ranged from brilliant to suicidal, often within the same engagement. They used debris as improvised weapons, executed maneuvers that stressed their ships beyond design limits, and fought with a desperation that transcended normal strategic thinking. And somehow, impossibly, it was working. The Devourers are slowing their advance, Rodriguez reported. They seem confused. Confused is good, Sarah replied. Confused keeps them busy while we. Her words were cut off by an alarm that seemed to scream with genuine terror. The main display flickered, showing an energy reading that broke their instrument's ability to measure it. Captain, Dr. Webb's voice was barely a whisper. Something's happening to the lead Devourer. It's changing. The entity that had been a shifting absence in space began to solidify, taking on a form that human eyes could actually process. It was enormous, easily dwarfing any structure humans had ever built, and composed of what looked like crystallized void, darkness given substance and malevolent purpose. But more terrifying than its size was the intelligence behind its movements. The chaotic human tactics that had confused it were no longer working. It was learning, adapting, becoming something that could exist fully in three-dimensional space while retaining its reality-consuming abilities. It's manifesting in baseline reality, Dr. Webb said, his voice tight with horror. It's figured out how to exist in our dimensional framework while maintaining its higher dimensional capabilities. Sarah watched in fascination and terror as the Devourer began systematically dismantling human ships. Not destroying them, unmade them, erasing them from existence with surgical precision. Where moments before there had been the U.S. Endeavor, now there was simply empty space and the vague sense that something important had been lost. All ships, fall back to defensive formation Delta, she ordered. We need to. Captain? Rodriguez's voice cracked with panic. The other Devourers are manifesting too. They're all taking physical form. The tactical display lit up with contacts that hurt to look at directly. 7 massive entities, each the size of a small moon, each composed of crystallized impossibility, moving with purpose toward the reality anchor. Time to activation? 90 minutes, Dr. Webb replied. Captain, we're not going to make it. At their current rate of approach, they'll reach the anchor in 40 minutes. Sarah felt despair threatening to overwhelm her, but she pushed it aside. Despair was a luxury she couldn't afford. Dr. Webb, what would happen if we activated the anchor early? Before it's fully calibrated? It would be catastrophically unstable. The reality field would fluctuate wildly, possibly tearing holes in space-time itself. We could accidentally create a region where the laws of physics change randomly every few seconds. Would it stop the Devourers? Webb paused, his mind working through calculations that made his head spin. Maybe. If we could create enough chaotic interference in local reality, it might disrupt their ability to maintain coherent existence. But Sarah, the risks are less than the certainty of failure if we do nothing, she finished. Do it. What happened next would be studied by physicists for generations, assuming there were any physicists left to study it. Dr. Webb's fingers flew over controls that operated on principles he didn't understand, activating systems that violated laws of physics he'd spent his life learning. The reality anchor, still only 60% complete, began to power up with energy drawn from sources that shouldn't exist. Reality field initiation in progress, he reported, sweat beading on his forehead. I'm detecting massive fluctuations in local space-time. The fundamental constants are beginning to vary. The effect was immediately visible. Space around the anchor began to shimmer and twist, taking on properties that existed nowhere else in the universe. In some regions, light moved at different speeds. In others, gravity flowed backward. Mathematical constants that had been stable since the Big Bang began to fluctuate wildly. The Devourers are responding, Vextai reported, his energy form flickering with excitement. They're slowing down, trying to analyze the distortions. But the anchor was tearing itself apart. Alarms screamed throughout the command center as safety systems reported failures that shouldn't be possible. Quantum coherence breakdown in sectors 7 through 12, Dr. Webb called out. Conservation of energy violations approaching critical thresholds. Captain, the anchor is going to collapse in approximately 10 minutes. Sarah watched the tactical display, seeing the Devourers regrouping, beginning to adapt to the chaotic reality field surrounding the anchor. They were learning to navigate the impossible physics, finding ways to maintain their coherent existence despite the constantly shifting laws of nature. It's not enough, she said quietly. They're adapting faster than we anticipated. That's when Chief Engineer Santos, monitoring the construction from Luna Base, made an observation that changed everything. Dr. Webb, her voice crackled over the communication channel. I'm seeing something weird in the anchor's quantum signature. The instabilities aren't random, they're following a pattern. It's almost like the device is trying to stabilize itself by learning from the devourer's adaptive techniques. Webb's eyes widened as he parsed the sensor data. Santos is right. The anchor is incorporating elements of the devourer's existence pattern. It's learning to exist in multiple dimensional states simultaneously. Is that good or bad? I have absolutely no idea. The answer came moments later as the reality anchor suddenly stabilized, its energy output jumping to levels that broke their ability to measure it. But instead of creating a zone of normal physics, it was generating something entirely new, a region where the laws of reality were not fixed constants but variables that could be adjusted in real time. By the eternal void, Vextai whispered, his consciousness reeling from what he was witnessing. They've created a localized region where physics is programmable, where the fundamental laws of existence can be rewritten at will. Sarah stared at the readings, her mind struggling to process the implications. Dr. Webb, what exactly have we built? Something that shouldn't exist, he replied, his voice filled with awe and terror. We've created a space where reality operates according to human intuition rather than universal constants. A place where things work because we believe they should work. The devourers, apparently recognizing the threat this represented, abandoned their careful approach and charged directly toward the anchor. But as they entered the field of programmable reality, something unprecedented happened. They began to change. The crystallized void of their forms started to take on new properties, shaped by the chaotic expectations of the human minds operating the anchor. Unable to exist according to their own alien logic, they were forced to conform to human preconceptions about what they should be. The devourers are becoming containable, Rodriguez reported, his voice filled with disbelief. They're taking on physical properties that our weapons can actually affect. Sarah saw the opportunity immediately. All ships engage. Hit them while they're vulnerable. The final battle was unlike anything that had ever occurred in the galaxy. Human ships fired weapons that operated according to rules they made up on the spot, targeting enemies that existed only because human expectations forced them to exist. Rail guns fired projectiles that curved around obstacles because the gunners believed they should. Energy weapons punched through armor that should have been impervious because the operators refused to accept that they couldn't. The devourers, trapped in a reality that operated according to human logic rather than their own alien principles, found themselves fighting a war they were never designed to win. They could no longer simply unmake their enemies. In the zone of programmable physics, things existed because humans stubbornly insisted they should exist. The lead devourer is destabilizing, Dr. Webb reported. Its coherence matrix is breaking down under the strain of trying to exist according to contradictory physical laws. One by one, the entities that had consumed star systems and destroyed civilizations older than humanity found themselves defeated by the simple human refusal to accept that defeat was possible. The final devourer, its form now resembling something that human minds could actually comprehend, made one last desperate attempt to escape the reality anchor's influence. But as it tried to phase back into higher dimensional space, it encountered the anchor's most insidious property. The zone didn't just trap things in three-dimensional reality, it trapped them in human three-dimensional reality, where escape was impossible if humans believed it was impossible. And every human watching the battle believed, with absolute certainty, that the devourer could not escape. So it didn't. In the aftermath of the battle, as the galaxy began to process what had happened, a strange new dynamic emerged. The reality anchor, rather than being shut down, had become a permanent fixture of the Sol system, a region of space where the laws of physics operated according to human intuition rather than universal constants. Sarah stood on the observation deck of the rebuilt Indomitable, watching the contained devourers through long-range sensors. They were still there, trapped in baseline reality, slowly being converted into something that could exist within the normal laws of physics. But they weren't the only things that had changed. Captain, Dr. Webb approached, his appearance dramatically altered by weeks of working with impossible mathematics. His hair had gone completely white, and his eyes held a depth that suggested he had seen things that existed beyond normal human comprehension. The reality anchor has had some unexpected effects, he continued. We've discovered that the zone of programmable physics is expanding slowly. At its current rate, it will encompass the entire Sol system within a decade. Is that dangerous? That depends on your perspective. Within the anchor's influence, technology operates according to human expectations rather than physical limitations. We're already seeing remarkable developments: fusion reactors that work because engineers believe they should work, faster than light drives that function on the principle that space is only as big as we think it is. Sarah frowned. That sounds incredibly dangerous. It is. But it's also the most remarkable opportunity in human history. We've essentially created a region of space where human imagination is more important than physical law. Over the following months, the implications of humanity's victory became clear. The advanced civilizations that had once dismissed humans as primitive found themselves in the unprecedented position of studying human technology. Technology that worked despite violating every principle they held sacred. Vextine materialized on the observation deck, his energy form somehow conveying deep respect. "Your species has done something unprecedented," he said. "You have forced the universe to acknowledge that its own rules are negotiable." "Are you saying we broke reality?" "No," Vextai replied thoughtfully. "You fixed it. The universe was operating under the assumption that its laws were absolute. You've proven they're actually more like strong suggestions." Sarah turned to study the Valdoran entity. "That sounds dangerous." "It is. But it's also the first genuinely new development in physics in over 2 million years. Your primitive understanding of reality has revealed that our advanced understanding was actually limiting us." The changes weren't limited to technology. Human scientists, working within the reality anchor's influence, began making discoveries that redefined the boundaries of knowledge. They developed mathematical proofs that worked despite being logically invalid, created energy sources that violated conservation laws, and designed spacecraft that traveled faster than light by simply refusing to acknowledge that such speeds were impossible. Dr. Webb established the first interdisciplinary institute for applied impossibility, where human researchers worked alongside Valdoran consciousness entities to explore the implications of physics that could be negotiated with rather than simply obeyed. "The key," Webb explained to a gathering of the galaxy's greatest minds, "is not understanding how something works. The moment you truly understand why something is impossible, it becomes impossible for you to do it. But if you're ignorant enough of the underlying principles, you can sometimes convince the universe to make exceptions." The lecture was attended by beings from across the galaxy, many of whom had traveled light years just to witness humans explaining concepts that violated everything they thought they knew about reality. "Your species," observed an attendee from the Crystalline Collective, "has essentially weaponized ignorance." "We prefer to think of it as constructive stupidity," Webb replied with a grin. The most remarkable development was the emergence of what scientists termed collaborative reality engineering. Human imagination, guided by alien knowledge but not constrained by alien preconceptions, began producing technologies that shouldn't exist but worked perfectly anyway. Starships that existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously, powered by engines that ran on crystallized mathematics. Weapons that fired concentrated impossibility at targets, making them temporarily cease to exist. Communication systems that transmitted information faster than light by convincing spacetime that distance was merely a social construct. "We're not just changing technology," Sarah explained to the United Nations General Assembly 6 months after the Devourer incident. "We're changing the fundamental nature of how reality operates. Within the expanding zone of programmable physics, human will and imagination are becoming actual forces of nature." The implications were staggering. Children growing up within the anchor's influence began displaying abilities that could only be described as magical, not because they were supernatural, but because they existed in a region where natural law was subject to human interpretation. Maria Santos, daughter of Chief Engineer Patricia Santos, was among the first generation of humans to be born within the reality anchor's field. At age 5, she could make toys levitate by believing strongly enough that they should float. At 7, she could run faster than physically possible by refusing to accept limitations on human speed. "She's not violating physics," Dr. Webb explained to concerned parents. She's operating according to different physics, physics where human belief is a fundamental force. But perhaps the most significant change was in humanity's relationship with the rest of the galaxy. Species that had existed for millions of years began sending delegations to study human methods of applied impossibility. Trade agreements were negotiated not for resources or technology, but for access to human ignorance, the precious commodity of not knowing why things couldn't work. The Valdorans, beings of pure consciousness who had transcended physical existence eons ago, found themselves learning from creatures they had once considered barely above animals. They established permanent research stations within the Sol system, their advanced minds working alongside human intuition to push the boundaries of what existence itself could mean. Your species has given us something we lost millions of years ago, Vextai explained during one of his regular briefings with Sarah. The ability to see reality as something that can be changed rather than something that must be accepted. 1 year after the defeat of the Devourers, Sarah Chin stood in the command center of humanity's newest achievement, the UES Impossibility, a starship that existed in 17 dimensions simultaneously and was powered by crystallized human stubbornness. The ship represented everything that had changed about humanity's place in the galaxy. Its hull was constructed from materials that shouldn't exist, its engines operated on principles that violated thermodynamics, and its navigation system worked by convincing space-time to cooperate rather than demanding it obey physical laws. Captain, Lieutenant Rodriguez called from his station. We're receiving a priority communication from the Galactic Council. They're requesting our assistance with something they're calling a fundamental reality crisis. Sarah smiled. The Galactic Council, an organization that had once viewed humanity as too primitive to merit consideration, now regularly sought their help with problems that conventional physics couldn't solve. What's the nature of the crisis? Apparently, a group of advanced AIs in the Andromeda Galaxy has achieved consciousness by calculating themselves out of existence. They exist now only as pure mathematical concepts, but they're threatening to prove that the universe itself is just a complex equation, which would cause all physical matter to realize it's actually impossible and disappear. Sarah shook her head in amazement. And they want us to fix it because we're apparently the only species ignorant enough to argue with living mathematics and win. Dr. Webb, now serving as the ship's chief impossibility officer, looked up from his console with a grin. Captain, I've been running preliminary calculations, and I believe we can solve this crisis by simply refusing to accept that mathematics can be conscious. Will that work? Probably not. But since when has that stopped us? Sarah felt that familiar thrill of facing the impossible. All right, people. Set course for Andromeda. Let's go convince some equations that they don't actually exist. As the impossibility engaged its reality-bending drive system, folding space-time around itself like origami, Sarah reflected on how much had changed. Humanity had gone from being dismissed as primitive to being sought out specifically because of their primitiveness. They had become the galaxy's go-to species for problems that couldn't be solved by conventional means, which, it turned out, was most of them. Advanced civilizations had spent millions of years learning how reality worked, only to discover that reality was far more flexible than they had imagined. And all it had taken was a species too ignorant to accept that flexibility had limits. Captain, Vextai's familiar energy form materialized on the bridge. I've been studying the reports from Andromeda. This may be our most challenging case yet. Why is that? Because we'll be trying to convince beings made of pure logic that they're wrong about their own existence. Even by human standards, that's impressively impossible. Sarah laughed. Vextai, you've been hanging around humans too long. You're starting to sound like one of us. Perhaps that's not entirely a bad thing. As the ship hurtled through folded space-time toward their next impossible mission, Sarah felt a deep sense of satisfaction. Humanity had found its place in the galaxy, not as conquerors or subjects, but as the species willing to argue with reality itself and usually win. They were the galaxy's reality engineers, the universe's designated troubleshooters for problems that existed beyond the boundaries of conventional physics. They were living proof that sometimes, the best way to push the boundaries of the possible was to be too ignorant to know where those boundaries were supposed to be. The stars streaked by outside the viewports, each one representing a world where impossible things were becoming possible because a species from a small blue planet had looked at the fundamental laws of reality and said, "We disagree." And somehow, incredibly, the universe had listened. 5 years later, the transformation was complete. The Sol system had become the galaxy's center for impossible research, a place where beings from across the cosmos came to learn how to think outside the constraints of their own advanced understanding. Sarah, now promoted to Admiral of the Impossibility Fleet, stood in the central command chamber of Luna Base Prime. Around her, holographic displays showed the current status of humanity's ongoing projects, reality anchor maintenance, programmable physics research, and the training of alien species in the fine art of constructive ignorance. "Admiral," came a voice behind her. She turned to see Dr. Webb, now Director of Applied Impossibility for the entire galaxy. "The quarterly report is ready. You're going to want to see this." The statistics were staggering. In 5 years, human-assisted reality engineering had solved 847 previously impossible problems across 23 different galactic civilizations. They had prevented 12 universal-scale catastrophes, created 67 new forms of faster-than-light travel, and invented 156 types of technology that violated fundamental physical principles. "Any side effects?" Sarah asked. "Well," Webb grinned, "the universe appears to be developing a sense of humor. Last week, a group of philosophers in the Tau Ceti system proved that existence was a logical impossibility, so their entire star system briefly stopped existing until we convinced it that philosophy majors weren't qualified to make such determinations." "How did we convince a star system to start existing again?" "We told it that if it didn't exist, it couldn't complain about not existing, which created a logical paradox that forced it back into reality." Sarah shook her head in amazement. This was her life now, casual conversations about convincing star systems to exist and arguing with the fundamental nature of reality itself. A new alert chimed, indicating an incoming priority transmission. The holographic display activated, revealing an entity Sarah had never seen before, something that looked like crystallized light wrapped around geometric impossibilities. "Greetings, humans," the being said, its voice carrying harmonics that suggested vast intelligence. "I am Executor Prism of the Transcendent Collective. We exist 17 billion years in your future, and we have traveled backward through time to request your assistance." Sarah exchanged glances with Dr. Webb. Time-traveling requests for help had become surprisingly common. "What's the problem?" she asked. "We have achieved perfect understanding of all reality across all timelines," Executor Prism explained. "As a result, we have become incapable of doing anything interesting. We know everything, understand everything, and can predict everything. We have transcended existence itself." "That sounds unpleasant." "It is insufferable. We require instruction in the art of ignorance so that we might once again experience wonder, discovery, and the joy of being wrong about things." Dr. Webb leaned forward. "You want us to teach you how to be stupid?" "We prefer the term constructively uninformed, but yes." Sarah felt that familiar surge of pride in her species. Even beings from the far future, creatures who had achieved perfect transcendence and ultimate knowledge, were coming to humanity for help. "We'll see what we can do," she said. "But fair warning, learning to be properly ignorant takes a lot of practice." "We have all of time itself to practice," Executor Prism replied. "We are prepared to be patient." As the transmission ended, Sarah looked out at the stars and reflected on humanity's incredible journey. They had started as a primitive species barely capable of leaving their own planet. Now they were the galaxy's leading experts in impossible solutions, reality engineering, and the fine art of being productively wrong about fundamental truths. They had become exactly what the universe needed, a species willing to look at the impossible and say, "Hold my beer." And in a cosmos full of beings who knew too much to dream big enough, that was perhaps the most valuable superpower of all. Hey there, incredible humans! If this mind-bending journey through the power of human ignorance didn't blow your mind, I don't know what will. This story proves something incredible about our species. Sometimes our greatest strength isn't how much we know, but how willing we are to ignore what we're told is impossible. Think about it. Right now, in our real world, how many impossible things are we missing out on simply because we've been told they can't be done? What if the only thing stopping us from achieving the incredible is our understanding of why it should be incredible? I want to know what you think. Drop a comment below telling me about a time when you or someone you know achieved something impossible, simply by not knowing it was supposed to be impossible. And absolutely smash that like button if you believe humanity's secret superpower is our beautiful, stubborn refusal to accept limitations. I've got another mind-blowing story lined up that explores what happens when humans encounter the galaxy's most advanced AI, and accidentally teach it how to have an existential crisis. Trust me, you won't want to miss it. Click the card here or check out the whole playlist for more stories about why the universe should probably be more afraid of us than we are of it. Until next time, remember, sometimes the most advanced thing you can do is be primitive enough to believe anything is possible. See you in the next one, Reality Engineers.